Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this week's podcast. I am delighted to have a fascinating, true leader, an inspiring leader who ended his career in the army, though he could have gone on as a general. He was the Commandant at the Royal Military Academy, Sandhurst, one of the best leadership institutions in the world, bar none. He was an operational brigade commander, and now he's made that unusual move of going from being a general in the army, and also he was the military secretary in charge of everybody's careers and things like that, to being the CEO of a business. It's in the charity sector. It does an amazing job. Particularly, I think its high point was in the toughest times of the pandemic. But we've already had a fascinating conversation. An hour will not be enough to discuss the kind of things we need to discuss. Without further ado, I will let him introduce himself.
Good morning. I'm David Rutherford-Jones, known by many people as David RJ. I am a former soldier of 34 years. I loved all of that. And for the last few years, I've been Chief Executive of Morden College. We're a charity and we operate in the UK care sector. We provide homes, love, need a lot of that, support, care for about 300 or so older people on 2 sites in South London. And we also have a grant-giving outreach program for other older people in our country who would like to stay for as long as possible living in their own homes, but don't really have the means to be able to do so. And that's where we come in. And that's me. Good morning, Jonathan.
Good morning, David. Well, look, lovely to have you on because the connection is wonderful. I mean, you were Chief of Staff to General the Lord Danner in his early career. You also are deeply respected by General Sir Simon Mayle. You and he,
it's neutral, I'm afraid.
You and he walk the hills, not as vagabonds, but it's you just go out and travel the world and trek in the Alps and various other places, the Atlas Mountains. I think you began in the Pyrenees, and also Roger Weatherby, the CEO of Weatherby's Bank, was an officer in your regiment. So look, wonderful having you on the series, David. We've already had great chats, as I said. Let's begin with, as the Commandant at Sandhurst, it is the institution that really helps the Army create its officer corps. You have to pass through it. It is a rigorous selection process. It varies in time. I did 2 years there to get through as a regular officer, another year afterwards. But otherwise, in that time, and we were just saying that if we look at politics, we look at the police, perhaps the fire service, the ambulance, they desperately need that investment in their teams and their leaders, which the Army luckily does. And I think it's not just for warfighting or peacekeeping, the others need it. But for you, what does inspiring leadership mean, David?
Well, I think if I put it in the context of me being in a team being led, Jonathan, then inspiring leadership for me is leadership that I personally grow to respect and trust, but also leadership that is sort of positive, energizing, and has a positive influence on the team, gives us a strong sense of purpose. And I think it's almost as simple as that, but of course it's not quite as simple as that. So that requires the leader to be of such character and integrity that all of that is generated within our team because of the individual leading us. And I've seen some incredibly inspiring leaders, but I think I would also say that leadership is not a popularity contest. I mean, it's a lot of things, isn't it? And of course it's nice to be liked, but I've never seen it as a popularity contest. You need the people you need to trust and respect you. Actually, you don't need everybody. That's probably the biggest lesson I've learned here at Morden College. But obviously it helps to be liked by everybody if that can be achieved. And I think that's an important counterbalance to that first point. So my point is that I have been very inspired, not just by people who have motivated me, given me a sense of purpose, it's kind of been fun, that sort of thing. But I've also been inspired by people who have had the courage to make a very difficult decision. People who make tough decisions can be inspiring too, is my point.
No, I think it's very true. And in your life that's brought you to this point today, as the leader that others have said you're inspiring. The nice thing is about inspiring leaders, they never describe themselves as that. And you go, no, I'm just rather an idle leader, which we had a laugh about it, because we also know you work jolly hard. It's that aim to look gravitas and have presence, not in a false way, but just to keep the calm. Chaos is contagious, calm is contagious. So I think I would imagine, particularly during the pandemic, which was certainly when everybody reported, what you did with Morden College was almost like a role model for how the other places should have been done. With, I think if I'm right, you only had, sadly, one person who died. Whereas many other organizations in your peer group lost a lot of people. I don't say lost them. They didn't get lost in the garden. As my brother, who's a surgeon, would say, when my brother died, he said he didn't just get lost. I'll go and find him down the bottom of the garden. I think when my father was killed, I always thought he'd got lost and he was away in Singapore somewhere, and one day he would have come back having been lost. But actually, we have to face into this and not get this sort of wokeism where we talk about, they've moved on. No, they've died. We're all going to die, and we've got to face it. But you've had a really interesting life, and I think a lot of the finest leaders that I've met, the men and women, have had some challenging times as they grew up. It made them who they are, to try and overcome that, to seek an understanding of who they are and to show that they're good enough. What shaped you on the journey? Just perhaps spend about 10 minutes on your life.
It's a bit of I think I need to just go back a little bit to the beginning, because what I would say is the first 25 years teed me up, shaped, if you like, my understanding of how to take on the next 35 years, which is where I think my achievements were. So I don't think I really achieved anything other than be me and survive in the first 25 years. And that's going to seem quite odd to you, but let me just explain what I mean by that as briefly as I can. I grew up in a family of 4 children. My mother was absolute megastar, died last year, and my father was an incredibly difficult man. He was a lot older than my mother. He was born of the First World War, came through the Second World War. Totally different generation of people, really, who found their way difficultly, I think, after the war. And so my father was very challenging. He was distant. His standards were beyond high. His expectation of us was outrageous. He wouldn't tolerate mistakes. And I got to the sort of end of my school life really having thoroughly enjoyed school but not achieved anything. And I still, sadly, only have 2 A-levels to my name, D grade and 5 O-levels, and I never passed maths O-level, which I'm very proud that I went all the way through my army career with maths O-level, because in fact it was a criteria to get a regular commission. So I don't know how I did that, but the point is, I got out of school with no self-confidence, and that was the key thing. I didn't know really who I was. Drifted around for a few months and then joined the army. I actually, Sandhurst was okay. It was a bit of another place for me to hide, if I'm honest, and kind of work out my journey. I didn't particularly enjoy it. And what was interesting is when I was Commandant, the Academy Sergeant Major on my first day kind of walks in with my Commandant's, my report. Well, bloody funny. And well, actually, it was the truth. I came in the bottom 50%. And it said something like, because my first choice was the green jackets, and said, he could never have been a green jacket, but we hope the cavalry will be able to cope with him, sort of thing. But funny enough, it did say that I was a kind person and that I showed some promise. So there you go. So those early years were difficult. But what I would say is this, that when I was commissioned, I knew on that day that something great was going to happen, in the sense that I felt there was a kind of something new for me. It was freedom. I was going off to join this regiment that was in Cyprus. It was adventurous to a new world. I sort of think I understood soldiering enough by then to feel I could do some of it. And I joined a wonderful regiment, and it was a pretty reckless subaltern. But I think at that point, it could have gone one or two ways. And this is the point I want to make to you, is the influence that others can have on you, and why leaders need to be so careful about how they play their influential cards, particularly with the younger people they are leading. Because I was lucky. I had some outstanding leaders in my life from the get-go when I commanded. Peter Hervey, my first squadron leader, Tony Wells, commanding officer, Peter Fishbourne, who commanded me a bit later, and then a bit later in my first brigadier captain's job, I worked for a guy called David Jenkins, who ultimately persuaded me to stay in the army. And so I took the staff exam, and like my A-levels, I took that 3 times, got it on the 3rd go, mentored by David Jenkins, and I went to staff college. But just before I went to staff college, I was given a chance by the regiment to command a squadron because I had a bit of time to kill. And I commanded my squadron alongside my dear friend Simon Mail, who actually has been a strong influence on me. And we had such fun. You know, we lent on each other, gave each other that operational strength to really command well on the operational tour, but we had a lot of fun. And so I went to staff college, a completely different guy. I was married and in love. I had 2 amazing little winky children who were quite irritating, if I'm honest, but absolutely loved them to bits. You know, I had passed the staff exam. I loved commanding my squadron and learned what serve to lead was about. And I felt I was on my way. And I'm very privileged to come out of staff college, which I loved as a brigade chief of staff. Now, the point of saying all that is that the first bit was tough. And it could have so easily gone wrong for me, I think, if I'd hit the wrong influences at that critical young 20s age. But actually what I had is these incredibly inspiring people who, for whatever reason, believed in me and encouraged me. And I learned from them, you know, yes, they had to get a grip of my ridiculous antics. And they weren't just, you know, the soldiers. There was some.
What was your best antic? What was your wildest antic as a young officer?
With 2 other young officers, we were in Padua, our mess, and there was a mess just sort of almost next door to us, RAOC, the Royal Army Ordnance Corps, and anyway, one night we'd had a regimental party. They were around but weren't at it, but some of them probably were. Can't remember. And there was this guy that none of us really kind of liked. Anyway, long story. We decided to go and, you know, kind of lob a thunder flash in his room. So we went and did it, filled a pillow full of feathers, lobbed it in, felt really proud about what we did. It transpired that the director of the Army Ordnance Corps, on 1-star or something, was visiting and staying in that room. You know, Jonathan, that was one of the worst moments of my life. And I learned a big, harsh lesson there. And that is, you know, it's not what happens in life that really matters. It's what you do next that really matters. And we were a little slow in coming forward to put our hand up because we were so shocked by the we'd done. And I should have we should have damn well gone into the action the following morning and said we did it, but we didn't. I mean, it all came out in the wash shortly afterwards. But you know, there's a little lesson for aspiring leaders or youngsters on listening to this is, you know, when it goes wrong, it goes wrong. That's what happens. It's what happens next that really matters. And so there's a little lesson attached to that story. But we thought we were so good, but boy, do we. Yeah,
it's like we share the story of Tom Ryle, who hopefully you can get on this series.
You should get him on this. I'll get him up here.
Yeah,
he'd be quite entertaining, I think.
Yeah,
he's also very competent. Obviously, don't tell him I told him
that. Go to his head. And what an amazing story. And then let's go from a fascinating life you had to, if you step back, I mean, I think they describe us as there's the experiential part of our lives and the observer of our lives.
Yeah.
And to be able to play both of those requires great wisdom.
Yeah.
And at times I've done one or the other, but to do both, it's work in progress. But let's say you're the observer looking at the experiential part of your life. What would you have described as your happiest, proudest moment of many, I'm sure, and what you learned from it? And what would you describe as your darkest moment, either personally or in a career-wise? And what did you learn from such a tough time?
Yeah, well, I think if I look at it in 2 halves, the first on a private, personal level, and the second professionally, I think there's no doubt about it that, you know, things around my family are when I'm happiest. It's full stop. And you know, I was incredibly happy the day I married Sarah, and we're still married all those years later. And you know, incredibly, you know, when our children were born, we were lucky they came out in good nick, and it's been a happy journey ever since. So I think there's no doubt about it. There's a sort of continuum of happiness that comes around watching your children succeed, you know, being happy in your marriage. And I think that as an underpinning in life is very helpful. So it's very contributory to having the confidence in your professional life. But of course, also, you know, your professional life going well has the same impact the other way. And I think that from my professional point of view, I genuinely, I think I've mentioned to you already that to me, the team is everything. I'm a passionate supporter of Newcastle United Football Club. They're now coming good. And everybody would say it would be down to money, but I would say that's helped. But actually, they've got a leader in their manager who is really pulling them together as a team. And it feels like a team to me. And, so it's when I've been in a team that is very evidently winning that I have felt the happiest. And it's almost as simple as that. And the Germans have this wonderful phrase, Fingerspitzengefühl.
Yeah.
When you have that team like that, and indeed the Newcastle United manager was talking about this the other day, but in articulating it in a different way. But when you have a team that really has come together and is winning, you can almost kind of touch it. It's an extraordinary thing. There's an atmosphere around it that just can. And when I was a troop leader, I was privileged to. I think it was the first time that I did something okay, and we had a troop competitions, which were huge fun and unbelievably competitive. And I think we were 14 troops then. And I came second, so we weren't a winner, but we come from the back a bit and went up the points during it. And it was that feeling, because I think we only missed it by a couple of points, and I felt we had won. That's the point. It felt an incredibly happy moment, and you in that moment, you can really feel that you could do anything with that team, and I suppose that's the highest achievement in a way. And goodness knows, armies go into very difficult circumstances, but there will have been wonderful moments for those leaders at all levels with their teams when they would have felt it. There'll be some sadness too. But actually, the strength of the team can overcome that. So I think it is around team success that I've been my happiest. And it's that idea and how you develop strong teams that I've tried to instill in those I've been privileged to lead and while I was at Sandhurst. I'm a lot more around that, but you'll get the point.
Yeah, wonderful. And then what about learning from a darkest moment in personal life and in your career?
Well, in my personal life, I lost my sister in February 2021. She was my friend. She was our elder sister. She was a great team leader. It was bloody difficult because it was in the Delta. We were locked down over that period, weren't we? It was February time. So difficult to say goodbye to her. And what I found interesting about that, Jonathan, is that I was totally unprepared for how difficult it is to lose a sibling. And I think you will definitely understand this, in that we tend to take our siblings for granted because, we grow up together. But of course, we share so much when we're younger. And I think in particular, my sister was our team leader during some very difficult moments with my father. And, she had the confidence to sort of help us as the younger ones to come through it. So I was totally unprepared for how difficult I found that. I think partly I was institutionally knackered. It had been a long journey from March 20 through to, that point with the pandemic, doing the job I do. So that kind of probably compounded it, but it was a very dark moment for me. And I happily admit here that I had a little bit of support from a therapist at the time just to get myself back on track. It wasn't much, but actually I encourage people who just find themselves in a bit of a rut sometimes. To me, I was in that rut totally unexpectedly. It just caught me off guard, but I knew I needed to do something about it because I'm leading a team here that needed me in the sense that I was their CEO at a very continuing difficult moment for this charity because of the pandemic. So slightly complicated answer to a straightforward thing. My sister dying was a very dark moment for me. I think,
and just staying with that one, firstly, I'm really sorry to hear about your sister and really respect you for sharing the fact that, like me, you've had a dark moment, and during that time you needed help. And I had a superb therapist from the House Group in London, Dr. Amy McCarthy, and she was brilliant for me about...
That's extraordinary. We used the same group.
Yeah, amazing.
Rosie, I keep saying Turtle, and she gets quite cross about that, is Talatl.
Yeah.
Is her name, but she's lovely. Very good.
They really are high quality, professional, CBT based therapists. And I think, my stepdaughter Alana, who's just here in our home in Lincolnshire at the moment, chatting with Lee, my wife. She is a trained sort of psychotherapist going through training and helping a lot of people in the NHS. And we were discussing this the other day, and one of my other daughters is just about to go through some therapy. She's been talking about it for ages. And we all said, everybody actually should go through some therapy. You need to go back and look over. I mentioned to you, I'm off on the Hoffman process on the 2nd of December for 9 days. And that's going to be very deep.
Yeah.
Back to my childhood and how it's affecting my behavior today.
Yeah.
And I think we all need to actually know ourselves. And if you just, a lot of people go to a complete crash because they haven't addressed themselves and some of the issues that went on in childhood that are, you're living your past now, still living it now, but we don't recognize that. So I just want to just acknowledge and thank you for sharing that, because everybody goes, oh, well, he's a really successful general and a CEO. He's never had any challenges. Well, they don't know you, and they don't know that we're all human. Only the strong can be vulnerable enough to ask for help.
And I've discovered, Jonathan, that just sticking on this point for a moment, that there are more people out there than perhaps we otherwise admit, or who probably would benefit from a little bit of that help. And it was my wife, Sarah, who suggested I did. And then she has a goddaughter who is a therapist, and I had a private chat with her. And I just gave her, I'm too close to her, she couldn't have been the therapist, but I gave her why I was struggling, really. I just couldn't understand. I'm a glass half full, upbeat kind of guy. And I just couldn't wrestle with the fact that I was in this rut. And she said, I know somebody who can really help you get out of that, and it will be short-lived. But so I couldn't agree with you more, actually. And I so pleased I did it. And not least I owed it to the people around me to get out of the bloody rut. Because you become a bit boring, so it was a very interesting moment.
Just staying with that one, David, sorry to add to it, really. Many who served in the military who might be listening would recognize the idea of a 6-month operational tour. You did a number of them. But then you come home to recover, do some light training, prepare, see your families. You just have some downtime to recover from the intensity of being always on with limited sleep, danger, perhaps death, mayhem going on. But in COVID, it was like 4 back-to-back 6-month tours.
Yeah, it was relentless.
With no time up. And for CEOs like you or leaders at many levels, it really got to their mental health, because they were giving so much of themselves, thinking it was a bit of a sprint when actually it was a triathlon, and no one told them how many laps around the pool they'd do before they transition, to another how many times they were going to cycle, to another transition how many times they're going to run, and then they were going to be told, go back to the pool.
Well, goodness, Jonathan, there's quite a lot I could say around that, but we probably haven't got time today. But I will happily say on this podcast with you that the toughest leadership challenge of my life, bar none, was trying to lead Morden College through that pandemic. And there are lots of reasons why that. I think the privilege of the army, I'd never probably really thought of it this way, but the privilege of an army is that from the very get-go, through your basic training and then onwards, you are preparing for crisis. That's all we do. And then eventually we enjoin crisis. A war, an operation other than war, an insurgency, whatever it might be, a fireman's strike even. I got involved in that when I was a brigade commander. But I think, so armies prepare very well, very competently for crisis. And when that crisis comes along, everybody naturally fits into their place, and it comes together, and you spend a few days kind of getting into it when you deploy out there, but you do. And they're in their lane and they're off. And then because the idea is that we've developed these very strong, competent teams, you can ride the hard moments, even though some of those hard moments are very hard indeed. I think what I found in this world is that trying to gear a civilian organization wherein most of my 180, 200 odd employees are there because it's kind of vocational and they want to be in care, not because they want to be in care in crisis, if I can put it that way. Trying to get them to gear up to what I was seeing in February 2020 as a major crisis. And oh, by the way, it's an enemy. You may not be able to see it. And like all enemies, it's got a target. And our 300 very vulnerable older people are that target. You know, and I was trying to get them to think like that and therefore act differently. Because the point about crisis is that if you don't act differently, you won't succeed. And if I may, it's so easy, isn't it, to sort of be rude to other people, but I'm sitting on a number of committees around the place, and I think what I'm seeing is that the organizations, everybody waited for the Prime Minister to say something, but he's the Prime Minister. How the hell does he know how to run an NHS through a crisis? So how much preparation for a major respiratory pandemic did the NHS really do? And how quickly were they able to gear up to it? And I hope that it's in this inquiry, we thoughtfully and helpfully, constructively, as a country, look at that so that we are more prepared in future. So I think it was incredibly hard work, and we didn't have the casualties that other people had. I mean, it was brutally harrowing. I didn't really realize how tough it had been, including my sort of great friend Gary Lashko at Chelsea Hospital. They had quite a bad dose of it, and some people have walked away from care because it was so harrowing, and they felt so unsupported. I think that's a totally different issue, but happy to comment. But it was really difficult, and the lessons are huge and need to be, we need to walk into the lessons, not step back and say, oh, we did kind of really well. That would be really totally the wrong thing to do. So I don't know whether that's helpful, but
incredibly helpful, and particularly to leaders listening around the world in over 120 different countries, that they listen to this at least. If you were to give them a tip for, as you say, preparing for a crisis, because there's going to be another one. We don't know what it is.
Yeah.
We're dealing with a number of crises at the moment: the Russian invasion of Ukraine, energy crisis, cost of living crisis, autocracies versus democracy. There's a range of really serious crises that we've got at the moment, which could get us down if we were to focus on all of them. You get quite gloomy and never sort of leave home. But if you were to give business leaders a tip about preparing for a crisis, what would be your top tip?
Well, I would say that you can do a lot of preparation for crisis in-house. The reason I say that is that I was at something not long ago. It was an NHS sort of thing, and I was asked to speak, and I was asked a question about, preparing for crisis. And I said, well, in the commercial world, which is essentially where I am, and I'm running, as you quite rightly said, running a business really. But, people talk about business continuity, and there are great organizations out there that will charge you a fortune. And everybody abrogates that responsibility, which I think is a responsibility of the leader, actually, to some organization to come in and put the framework together, which is sort of documentary, and there's a few lectures and that sort of thing. And I've done a bit of that, and I just think it's nonsense. And I'm not, I don't want to criticize organizations that make it their world to do business continuity training for organizations like mine. But I think the responsibility is on me, because actually when that crisis comes, I'm going to have to lead this organization through that crisis. So if I haven't really thought about it, if I haven't really thought about, before coronavirus came around, I always thought norovirus was going to be the terrible thing we were going to get hit with. It seems to be periodic in this country. Actually, we did have norovirus just before the pandemic, and it was kind of okay. But I used to use that as how are we going to manage the cross-infection and all of this sort of thing? And what were we going to do if we really got it badly in various of our residences? How would we keep safe but keep life going and all of this sort of thing? I mean, it takes quite a bit of thinking, actually, in the detail. So, and I wanted to know that I had been through that preparation with our team, so that when the moment came, we had done that preparation ourselves. So my encouragement to leaders is, you could get somebody in to come and give you some advice, but actually be 100% at the helm of that preparation for crisis yourself. Bring your team with you, because that way, when it comes, you will be much more cohesive.
Yeah. Well said. Very good advice. Thank you,
Yeah.
David. It is about personal leadership rather than abrogation. Yes,
I think
by all
so.
means. But bring in some, get some advice, but then get on and do it. You know your business better than anybody else would do. I'm always interested in with the wisdom of hindsight. I think Steve Jobs said you join up the dots afterwards, looking back, and you can make sense of your career now.
Yeah.
But going back to that, in that 25-year period when you were still learning, preparing you for the next 35 years, if you met yourself age 16, what bit of advice now, with the wisdom of those 34 years, would you give to the young? This matters, but don't worry about that. What would you say?
Get your hair cut. I had quite long hair back then. I only had it that long because I knew it really irritated my father. So I was part of the problem. That, let's just be quite clear about that. But it's a really great question. I think I would say two things, one of which I've touched on already. The first is that listen. So if I eventually found my way with my father, but it was at a point when he was very ill. I'd just been appointed to command the Light Dragoons, and I knew when I sat with him that he was immensely proud of me, and we talked for a long time, and then he died a few weeks later. So I reconciled our differences together too late in life. When I was reflecting back on my life with him, I was sad in a way, because I was remembering some moments where he wasn't actually, the bugger that we all thought he was, although he definitely could be that person, no doubt about it. But he used to offer some great advice. I remember he always said to me, never make an enemy of anyone you don't have to. And, what a great line. That stuck with me for the rest of my life. I'd rather forgotten that he had said it. In fact, strangely enough, years later, somebody else mentioned that to me. But I think, he told me once to embrace difference. I think, not sure I really understood what he meant, but actually the context we were sailing, and it's a long story, but so I think my first point is listen to, from a young age, listen, take it in, don't be that sort of brash, defensive, slightly rebellious person all the time. I think there is some great advice around you from your young teens that you can begin to absorb. And the second thing, which I really touched on already, is it took me a long while to realize that it's not what happens in life, it's what happens next in life that matters. And I think, if I was a bit more, if I knew that from an early age and really understood it, I would have been a little less impetuous, a little less stupid, if I'm honest, in my sort of late teens, and definitely as a subaltern. But I did learn that lesson. And actually, it's another one of those points that I've really driven home, to cadets at Sandhurst and that sort of thing. It's what you do next that matters the most.
It's a wonderful bit of advice. It's not what happens to you, it's what you do next, and it really fits with that old 2,500-year-old Stoic philosophy. The only thing you can control is your thoughts and your actions, and events happen to you. It's not the fact the events happen; it's how you handle it that marks the inspiring leader from the very average or expiring leader. And talking of expiring leaders, we were talking about how disappointing many of the politicians are that we have at the moment. It's very easy for us to sit as armchair critics of politicians, but you try and do it. But that we really felt there was a key point, and as we go around the Inspiring Leadership Compass and the research and what makes high-performing leaders and teams, the first one that we always come to is moral quotient. And the discussion that we had is when you lose your integrity, you lose everything.
Yeah.
And this interesting point that so many people are going, oh, well, Boris only lied a few times. But the point is that integrity, when it eats away, and I know at times when I haven't done what I said, my trust quotient was completely eroded, and I had to become trustworthy. And that's where your own people are judging you by your example, not the fine words that you can say. And there's a whole audiobook I'm listening to on the topic of trust, and I think I'll do a book review about it when it comes out. And I'm listening to it at the moment. But it's this point of it's your example. If someone's had an affair or something, and the trust has broken between a couple, how are you going to rebuild it? Or is it all over? Has it finished forever? And I think this moral quotient, behavior, your values, your principles, lose integrity, you lose your moral compass, your true north. What's your build on a tip that you'd give people about how important this is?
Well, I think that individual integrity is, as you say. So I think when you do lose your integrity, you are at least at risk of losing everything. I'm sure relationships can be repaired, and in a sense that should be encouraged, shouldn't it? So, but I think you as a person lose a bit of you when you cross that line. In a professional context, when individuals do that, I think in a way you really do. It's very hard to come back from it. And part of the reason for that, I think, is not just that you, the leader, who are asking people to do so many things. I mean, after all, look at the British Army or armies. As a leader, ultimately, you're going to find yourself asking the people you lead to do things that are fundamentally against human psyche. It's not normal to go to work and put your life on the line. So if somebody's going to ask me to do that, then I'm, bloody well need to know that I trust them and their judgment and everything else. And actually, I could apply that same high level of interpretation of integrity, if you like, in my day job here and how we went through the pandemic. I knew I had to have my staff really trust and respect me for what I was going to ask them to do, because what I was asking them to do was not what they do normally every day. Everybody got re-rolled because people had to isolate because there was no testing. So at one point we were 40% staff down. So with the remaining staff, we were providing over 7,000 items of food, beverage, medicines, and household goods to our residents every week in a sustainment program. We were trying to protect our sites genuinely to keep the bug out and keep people out we didn't want. We had a communication system that was about buddying up and talking to residents on the phone and constantly making sure they were informed and happy and that we were catching them when they were down. So, I really was asking a hell of a lot of the staff, and they had to trust and respect me. So a failure of integrity as me, the leader in that context, just in the same as the armies I just described, would, I think, be catastrophic. But I think also, just very quickly, that there's a sort of team integrity. There's a kind of corporate integrity. And I think we sometimes underplay the value of that. And we could go on for that a lot. But I very much believe that here at Morden College, people need to see us as an honest organization. And there's quite a lot behind what I mean by that. But you'll get the point. It's individual and team, more and corporate, if you like. But I prefer to say team.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's
everything.
It is everything. And when I look back at moments when I'd lost trust or done the wrong thing, and my judgment was questioned, that's terrible.
Yeah.
And you really, it's almost, you can't really get it back. You have to relearn, rebuild yourself, and go out intending to do the right thing.
Yeah.
And imagine, almost in my case, my late father, that he's there with me, and no one else is there, but he's there, and I can see myself, and he can see me, and he goes, I'm proud of you, son. You're doing the right thing. But I think you need this team of supporters around you mentally. They may be long gone.
I think, going back to my brilliant, childish, well-executed attack on the combat supplies officers' mess all those years ago with my friends, the point is we didn't immediately own up to it. That's really what I was saying there. And I learned a hard lesson there, because I knew that when the days later when we were in the commanding officer's office, we all got extras beyond our wildest imagination, extraordinary officers. But I knew that man who I respected so much and has become a huge mentor and close friend in my life, I knew that he was looking at me and saying, is honesty an issue with these officers? Have I got a dud here? I knew I had to prove him wrong. That my point about is, it's not what happens, it's what you do next, but it's also holding your integrity intact, however big or small the issue. Yeah. Do you know, Jonathan, it's almost trite, isn't it? But it just is the sodding glue. And if people really got that, I think we'd be a better world.
And it's so much a case of between stimulus, something happens or someone's rude to you, and your response to that situation. Often people go, I couldn't help myself. Stimulus happened, I responded. Yeah. But actually, there's always choice in the middle. You're always a choice. And
there's always a choice.
We often abrogate that and go, I couldn't help myself. It was the circumstances. They made me do this. He made me. And this is very much going on today. They're going, well, you owe it to me. You need to make me happy. You've offended me. You've offended me.
By the way, it's not always somebody else's problem.
No.
Look at yourself in the mirror. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. You've got to take personal accountability, personal ownership, choosing whether you're going to be offended or not.
Yeah.
And you know, even last night, I found with such a busy household with 3 dogs and puppy and grandchildren and family staying, and then you know I had a lot to do, and I found myself getting terribly grumpy and just stressed, and whoa, breathe, what's going on here? You know, you have a choice. And I just acted on the thing that was stressing me and I was anxious about and dealt with it. And then poof, everything had gone. I was like, hey, hello, here I am again. They went, so is grumpy grandpa gone? I go, your grumpy grandpa's gone. I've noticed.
Well, we've all been grumpy. Exactly.
Little grace.
I can be grumpy too sometimes.
Yeah, we can. But we choose. Yeah. We choose our attitude and we choose our mood. Hey, there's so many things we can do. I'll just dip into one or two things. I think I'm very interested in health, particularly since you're in the health. Well, we're in the energy business, aren't we? Because you know we've got a personal energy to then get discretionary life energy from the people, whether it be when you were Commandant at Sandhurst or whether you were Brigade Commander on operations, or here you are as a CEO. But what are your top tips on physical health? What you do now at your age? And looking after your mental health, we've already talked about this a bit, but just keeping it going. Now you've had some helpful therapy. What are you doing for both of those two things that you'd pass on as a tip to others?
Okay, faith, music, trekking, particularly in mountains, exercise, and fun. So on the physical side, I go to a gym that we're very privileged to have here at Morden College. I don't get there enough, but my aim is to be there a minimum of 3 days a week on the cross trainer, 40 minutes at whatever level it is, 10. So, and I find that keeps me fit for a guy of my age, and also it's a good way to build up to doing a mountain trek. I love walking in mountains. I do it with Simon Mail a lot. We've done it in Corsica around Europe. This summer we went over the highest peaks in Pyrenees for 7 days. There's something amazingly cathartic. You have to work bloody hard to get to the top. So there's a kind of reward in that. And then you find yourself, you know, I don't know, 7,600 feet as we did on one day, sitting on a little mountain pass having a lunch. And it's like the whole world, both metaphorically and physically in every respect, to be honest, is beneath you. So there's a very cathartic piece about being in mountains. I mean, I love water as well and coastlines and rivers, but there's something about mountains for me, and properly walking, trekking, and doing it with somebody who's a friend, who's a good partner to walk with. The silences can be long, the chat can be much. You know, it's very special, and I get a huge amount out of it. The second thing is music. You know, when I'm on my own at home, I don't watch the TV much. I do enjoy reading, but actually, what I really do is listen to music. If you listen to my playlist, you wouldn't know who I am. It's very broad range, lots of genre, but I absolutely love music, and I can lose myself in music, Jonathan, truly so. And the first thing, really, the top of the list is faith. I have a strong faith. It's very private to me. You know, but it does mean a lot to me, and I have found, particularly as I've got older and contested with it, but understood it better. It's been helpful, and it was certainly helpful when my mother died in 2020 and my sister died in 2021, for example. And I would imagine that if we'd had a bit more of a harrowing time as opposed to just a bloody difficult time at Morden College, I'm sure my faith would have been helpful in that context as well. And then finally, it's about fun, isn't it? I mean, I have tried to have fun all my life. It is absolutely true that in those first 25 years, I probably had too much, got the priorities wrong. but I do try and inject humor, laugh at yourself as much as you laugh at others who take themselves too seriously. Have a laugh with people, do things that create fun for others. We've just taken our leaders away for a few days, and a third of the time was actually just laughing. So I think fun is really cathartic if you get it right, and particularly having fun with other people.
Yeah.
So there you go. That's kind of.
I love it. I love it. I'll pick the next one. Resilience. You described particularly during the pandemic how much resilience is needed. But also thinking back to your days on operations, and there, if we look at other parts of the world, I'm interested in the combat and the war that's going on in Ukraine with those Ukrainian soldiers. Since 2014, they've been fighting, back in Crimea. That's a lot of experience they've gained, but it's been harrowing. And of course, the country's now having its infrastructure being taken out because Russia is no small foe to take on, and it's going to go on for many years, I fear. What's your advice to what do you think will be happening in Ukraine? You predicted that COVID would be a long time. What's going to be going on with the invasion of Ukraine?
Well, a quick one on personal resilience. I can't remember. I may have mentioned it earlier, but I think pressure definitely comes when you don't know what you're doing as a leader. I can't emphasize that more. I've occasionally realized I've gone into something and I haven't been in command of my whole brief. And when you think about it, that's just crap. It's also irresponsible. You have a responsibility. You should be accountable, and a part of that is understanding what the hell it is you're meant to be doing. So don't put yourself under pressure, because you will find your resilience very quickly wanting if you don't know what you're doing. So I just say that as a single point, because I've seen it in others, and I learnt it myself the hard way many years ago. The second thing I'd say on Ukraine, and I mean, I think it's interesting, Jonathan, I absolutely love this country. I am a true patriot. I love Great Britain. I love everything it stands for. I cannot stand the declinists and the people who would do this country down. Why is it that half the world's refugees from crisis want to come here? Because we're benign, tolerant, we're decent people. I believe in the decency of the British, and getting rather bored of people doing us down. I say that because I would have fought for this country, no problem at all. And however long it took, I would have fought. You come and test our liberties and our freedom, and I will stand by that. And I think if people can grasp that listening to this, then they'll understand what's going through the mind of those Ukrainians. Everything they own in a personal level, everything that they value as a nation, their independence, their freedom, is being tested by Mr. Putin and his monstrous regime. And so I think the first point is this personal sense, but also team sense of peoples in nationhood. And we are becoming complacent in the liberal democracies about that. Boy, are we becoming complacent. One day we're going to pay a price if we're not careful. So, but I think that is part of the reason why the Ukrainians are being so resilient. I think there's no doubt about it, that resilience is reinforced then because, the right nations in the world, the liberal democracies, are standing by their freedom in Ukraine and helping them protect it and recover it by arming them and all the other bits and pieces that we're doing. The slight problem there is we're pushing the thing into a bit of a stalemate, I feel. And, when's it going to end? So I think there has to be an end. And then I think it's down to really great statesmanship, and which may not be either Ukrainian or Russian in the first place. But somebody needs to begin to break at the end of this. There are no winners in war. There are none. There are just, to varying degrees of success. I doubt Ukraine are ever going to get everything back, but I think Russia are going to lose huge. The fall for Russia is going to be massive. And some clever people need to really get that right, because I don't know how long they can be resilient in a physical sense in the end. Their electrical infrastructure is down. He's stopped moving the grain. It's beginning to impact on the world. And I just wonder how soon people are going to begin to bore of this. Bore's the wrong word, actually. I apologize for using that, but you know what I mean. But I think, but their individual resilience is becoming because they love their nation.
Yeah.
And we should love ours more than we do.
Yeah.
I could just say that on this forum.
No, I think you should. I think, and too few people do. It's very easy to be the armchair critic of everybody else, to run your country down. And there's times when actually I just stopped watching the news. I haven't been watching it on the television for many years. I found it quite addictive. I couldn't believe how incompetent the situation and the people in it were, about 5 prime ministers in 6 years. So it was almost like a reality TV show, but it happened to be our country. And it really saddened me how, in the eyes of the world, let alone in the eyes of our own country, we became such a laughing stock in our politics, prime minister.
And I think, if you're Mr. Putin or Mr. Xi or Mr. Bolsonaro or Mr. whoever, because there are a lot of these tossers around the place, I think if you're them, you're looking at the liberal democracies and going, is it all right, really? This freedom thing that you value so much, this democracy thing, you got weak leadership, you're arguing amongst each other, you're giving us the impression that actually what we offer, which is stability, is better. So we need to be very careful, I think. The Ukrainian crisis was born partly out of our complacency, would be my view.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And within these situations, there are teams and teams that people are having to build. Teams and developing strong teams has been a key theme of yours. If we were to talk about executive teams in business, but your study of 35 years of leadership has always been looking at building teams from troop to squadron to regiment, brigade.
Yeah.
What have you seen best done by inspiring leaders, or even in your own experience, where they or you took a toxic team with maybe it had their sort of military white collar psychopath, but yet he happened to be wearing rank. And I did come across a few of those. I even served for one, but he remained nameless because I must respect him. But where things have gone toxic, how did you turn it around to create a happy, fun-loving, high-performing team when it had gone toxic? Maybe because of an individual or the culture of the team. What's your advice?
Well, I'm a great believer in devolving responsibility downwards. So I think we do that very well in the army. It's important to make sure that everybody in the organization understands the overarching strategy and intent. We have 4 strategic aims here, and so on and so forth. And it was particularly important, I found, in the pandemic, to make sure that the kind of big messages were understood by everybody. But then, life gets too busy once you're in the crisis, not to I don't mean abrogate at all, but to devolve responsibility and give people the headroom to get on with it. So I genuinely believe that. I've tried to practice that in my life. I think giving people that headroom, giving them the sort of sense of their own freedom to think and shape how they're going to enjoy the plan you've come up with your team, really important. But there are always, I'm afraid, toxic players. I've seen them everywhere. I saw them in the army. I've sadly seen more of it outside the army, which was a bit of perhaps a naive, but bit of a surprise to me. And I think you've got to work with them. Why is it that team is toxic, or that individual is behaving in such a toxic way? What's it about the kind of structure or the sense of purpose that you've given them that may not be right? So I think ask yourself a little bit of why, and then sort of try and work with them to improve. Sometimes you can move people around and change their put them in another team or something, whatever. But the bottom line, and I know, I'm sure others would probably say this, particularly I suspect some of the soldiers, but the bottom line is that it doesn't always work. And then I think my loyalty to the team is far greater than my loyalty to the individual. And, that may be tough to say, but that is, when you're trying to run an organization through crisis or deliver success, it is the team that needs the priority. And so if you have somebody who is just toxic and is not really, in spite of your efforts, playing into that helpfully and being a team player, they have to go. And I sadly had to do that on 3 occasions here with senior people. And it's not nice. In fact, it's bloody difficult because, in fact, my Sandhurst report told me I was kind, and I think I genuinely am a kind person. So it's not an easy thing for me to do, but I'm strong enough to do it. As I said earlier, leadership is also not a popularity contest. So I think that's probably my answer. Hopefully not, but if necessary, they got to go.
Yeah. And if you can't change the people, you've got to change the people.
Great line.
And I have come across many times with the different CEOs I've been honored to work with as their trusted advisor in an executive team where they have someone who is toxic and is affecting the whole of the team. And they think the organization revolves around them. And of course, they have issues with, post-truth, if you even use that, but they basically can't tell the truth. And they will make you think that you're actually losing it rather than them playing with the truth. And one of my old CEOs just said, look, if you've got someone who's a white-collar psychopath, you need to emigrate to avoid them. If they're your boss, get away from them, because you won't change them. And you've got to help them find their happiness elsewhere. Maybe the setting is wrong, but sometimes there's just some pretty evil bastards, men and women, who are they get pleasure from playing with people's emotions and lives. And you think you can reason with them and that they'll be understanding. And if you give them a bit of ground, can you reason with Putin? Is he? Everybody's been nice to him. It didn't stop him then invading Ukraine, and people didn't think he'd go that far. And so you get it from Putin down to just individuals in a team. So I don't want people to be paranoid, but you do have to wake up and smell the coffee. And as one said, what is it you know now about him or her that you'll find out in a year's time if you delay doing something? Well, I know now that they'll never be a good fit, and they're destroying our culture. So what are you going to do? I'm going to be firm in the decision and kind in how I execute it to let them leave with dignity.
I think you can, through leadership, see it coming. So, part of leadership is to know your people. And I think sometimes leaders I've met don't really invest enough time in understanding the nature of the people who are in the team with them. What I learned very quickly as a soldier, your first command as a troop is only 12 people. I mean, you're one of them. So actually it's only 11. There's nothing. I mean, you infantry guys had 3 times the amount, but the point is that it was 11 people. And you had 1 or 2 who were outstanding, naturally talented. And you had at the other end, some really challenged people. So the question is, how do you make that team a winning team? And Morden College is the same. We're a very frontline business. There are some great people and there are some not so great people. But you can take both extremes, but I think you cannot take the destructive ones. I really think they are the tossers of life. And if they can't move on, then they need to go because I just really can't emphasize more this point that the team, in the end, the team is more important than the individual.
So true.
Tough, but it's true.
No, I think it's very true. And on many occasions, I had it at a CEO level with the group CEO of an organization. And I said, your CEO is toxic in that. Oh, but he makes more money than any other bits. He may do. But I assure you that when you do have the courage to get rid of him because he's a bully, he's unpleasant to people, he's very toxic, he undermines you, that actually the team below him will probably make more money without him suppressing and controlling them. And sure enough, they made the decision to get rid of the person. They exited them. And within 6 months, they had made 30% more than they had before. And the engagement levels of that organization went up. And they went, how can this be? Well, it's not brain, it's not rocket science. Final 2 questions is favorite book, and then we'll do the top tip. A book that you've listened to or read recently that you'd recommend to others, David, about leadership, or it could be someone's autobiography, biography, something that is going to help people listening to be a better leader, in your opinion. And it's just very interesting book. Well,
if I may, there are 2, one because I've been a soldier, but I was also spent a decade in the care sector. So the first is a book that I absolutely love reading when I first read, and I've read it twice since, which is Colin Powell's My American Journey. I think it's a wonderful thing. His journey itself is very inspiring. But I think what I loved is the way he described loyalty, which is about, before you make a decision, everybody in the team and joining in the discussion to find the right way to go. But at some stage, that's loyalty. At some stage, the leader has to make a decision because that's how it works. And then you need to stand behind that decision as though it were your own decision, whether you like it or not. That's loyalty. And I think that definition of loyalty is good. It works for me. And I think we need to reinvest in that understanding of loyalty in teams around in this country. And actually, it probably starts from the top in government. The second book is about health and well-being. And I recently read it, and it's by a man called Atul Gawande, who is an Indian American. And I'm kind of guessing he's just an amazingly wonderful man. And he wrote a book called Being Mortal. And it's about the journey of life and aging in particular. And what I love about that book, Jonathan, is this emphasis on community. It's kind of like what we've been talking about through this wonderful podcast I'm doing with you. It's sort of like the team, isn't it? But I think the ideals around that Gawande describes are 100% germane to our societies today, more than it has ever been. And I would encourage everybody, particularly at our sort of age, but everybody to engage with Being Mortal.
Yeah, I both books I really love. Colin Powell, such an inspirational guy, and
yeah.
his other book was It Worked for Me in Leadership and in Life.
I've read that too, and
is a cracking book.
And I was privileged to meet him when I was working in the North Atlantic Alliance in SHAPE. I went across with D. Sakir, and he was Secretary of State at the time. And before, he took a bit of a fall in the end, we know, but he was very inspiring. What I loved about him, he was kind of really interested in me. He was a big man, but gave me 2 minutes. And in those 2 minutes, I really felt he was interested in me. Another very important aspect of leadership.
Yeah, and it's only people like the late Her Majesty the Queen, Diana, people like Colin Powell, who have that ability to really be interested in you. Not in an inauthentic way. They genuinely make you feel like you're the only person in the room.
And he had a tough first 25, probably 30 years or more.
Yeah. No, he did. Fascinating story. And then the second theme, Being Mortal, which I have also listened to. I've read a number of books, funny enough, about death and dying. I suppose it's with one brother being attacked and the other one dying within 10 weeks, like you losing your sister. That it's the stage of life we're at where having a good life and a good death, as the Stoics would say, is very important. That we need to face the fact, and not to be suddenly shocked by we find ourselves dying, but that we know we're mortal and that the time will come.
Yeah, it's not a taboo, and that's certainly doing my current job has been really helpful in that, because we don't talk about it, but basically, everybody's heading to the last bus stop at some stage along that journey.
Yeah.
And it's a question of how you get them there. And I think the good life to the end is a theme that we run here, which I love, actually. I could talk about it for hours, but I think there can be a good life even when you're very ill. But you have to come at it slightly differently. We're a little bit reactive in the way we look after people in this country. We need to be far more proactive to be preventative. But even if we can't be preventative, we can be proactive to give them a good life.
I think it's a fascinating topic that you're on, and I'm a great believer that we need to move upstream to actually help people's health and well-being. I want to die young at a ripe old age. I want to screech across that line at 99 and 360 days. Going, wow, what a ride! And I don't want my health span to run out before my lifespan does. And too many people, their health span runs out some 10 to 15 years earlier. And
it does. But I think, we're getting better at it. It's a huge subject actually, but, maybe we could talk about it again. But it really interests me because of my job. So we are leading a program that is about the good life in old age. And what does that really mean in practice? That enables you to have a good life at every stage. And even though you become more frail and there may be comorbidities and so on, that doesn't mean you can't have a good life. But it's like everything, you've got to apply a science to that and then really understand how you're going to support people to have a good life. We don't do enough of that as a society.
A really important topic. And I think you ought to, I'm sure you've given a talk about it, but I look forward to hearing it. Let's end, because this has been such fun. We've slightly run on, but because it's been so good, I couldn't give up on this. If you just do an introduction and your 2-minute top leadership tip, please, David, just to end off with.
Yeah. I am David Rutherford-Jones, known more often as David RJ. I was a soldier for 34 years, which I loved, and I'm recently been the CEO of Morden College, which is a charity that operates in the UK care sector. We provide homes, love, care and support for over 300 people on 2 sites in South London. And we also have a sort of outreach grant-giving organisation that provides support to other older people in our country who want to stay living at home, but really need our support to be able to do so. And so we do that as well. My top tip to aspiring leaders is build strong teams, invest in building strong teams. It's simple, really. You know, my experience is that a team that is professionally competent, really on top of its game, a team that is cohesive, really pulling together in one direction, and a team that is, above all else, happy, is a team that is going to be far more effective in delivering its output than the sum of the individual talents within that team. And time and time again, I've seen that to be the case. But I think what I would say is it's everybody in the team has to play a part in that, building that team. But nobody is going to be playing a part harder than the leader, and the leader needs to understand that. And a further small tip to go with that, in that context for the leader, is be visible. I really believe in visible leadership. You can't be visible all the time, and indeed you need to create the space to do the thinking, which is so fundamental to strong leadership. I get that. But you can be visible. You can choose when and where to be visible at the right time, and it can be so impactful. And it's not about being visible on the platform you and I are on. It's about getting amongst your people and knowing when to do that. So there you go. My top tip is invest in strong teams and be a visible leadership. And I've really enjoyed myself, Jonathan. Thank you so much indeed.
Well, Major General David Rutherford-Jones CB, CEO of Morden College, thank you very much indeed. Fascinating conversation. We could have gone on for a lot longer, but it's been an honor having you on the Inspire Leadership podcast. Thank you.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you, Jonathan. Bye.
Bye.